What happens when a moment of cruel mockery turns into a night of absolute terror? When Jared Hollis grabbed an elderly man's walking cane in a dimly lit Chicago bar, laughing with his friends at what he thought was just a useless stick, he had no idea he was about to trigger a weapon designed for the deadliest agents in American intelligence history. The old man sitting quietly in the corner wasn't just another forgotten face nursing a whiskey. He was Malcolm Delaney, a retired CIA operative who spent 40 years in the shadows, eliminating threats most Americans would never know existed. That innocuous-looking cane. It contained technology that could incapacitate, track, and mark targets without leaving a trace, a relic from covert operations in Eastern Europe during the height of the Cold War. Within seconds of Jared's thoughtless grab, a silent alarm was triggered. Within minutes, his fingerprints were scanned and uploaded to secure databases. Within hours, his entire life was under microscopic scrutiny by systems designed to identify hostile actors and neutralize them before they could strike. What Jared thought would be a funny story to tell his buddies the next morning became a descent into paranoia as he discovered his phone was being tracked. His apartment was under surveillance, and mysterious vehicles began following him through Chicago's streets. Who was this old man? Why did a simple act of disrespect unleash what felt like the entire weight of the intelligence community upon him? And most terrifying of all, could he stop what he'd accidentally set into motion, or had his life changed forever the moment his fingers touched that cane? This is not just a story about a careless mistake. This is about the invisible world that exists parallel to our own, where retired spies never truly leave the game, where their tools of survival become extensions of themselves, and where one wrong move against the wrong person can reveal just how little control we really have. How did a night of mockery spiral into a manhunt? What secrets did Malcolm Delaney carry that made his simple cane worth more than most people's homes? And when the dust finally settled, would Jared Hollis ever feel safe again? October wind cut through Chicago's Logan Square neighborhood like a knife, sending dried leaves skittering across Milwaukee Avenue as the city settled into another autumn evening. Inside Murphy's Tavern, an Irish pub that had occupied the same corner since 1952, the atmosphere was warm and familiar. Wooden booths lined the walls, their surfaces carved with decades of initials and forgotten dates. The smell of fried food and beer hung heavy in the air, mixing with the low murmur of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. Malcolm Delaney sat in his usual spot, the corner booth farthest from the entrance, back against the wall, face toward the door. At 73 years old, he looked like what most people expected of a retiree. Grey hair thinning at the crown, reading glasses perched on his nose, a slight hunch to his shoulders that suggested years of sitting at desks, or perhaps arthritis settling into aging bones. He wore a simple flannel shirt, khaki pants, and worn leather shoes that had seen better days. His weathered hands wrapped around a glass of Jameson, the amber liquid catching the dim overhead lights. But Malcolm's eyes told a different story. They moved constantly, sweeping the room in systematic patterns: entrance, exit, windows, faces, hands, body language. He catalogued every new arrival within seconds: threat level, physical capability, potential concealment locations. It was automatic now, ingrained so deeply that he couldn't turn it off even if he wanted to. 42 years in the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division had rewired his brain at a fundamental level. Retirement didn't change that. It just meant he no longer had official backup when his instincts screamed danger. Leaning against his booth was his constant companion, an ornate wooden cane carved from dark mahogany, its surface smooth from years of handling. The handle was silver, elegantly curved to fit a human palm, with intricate engravings that looked decorative but were actually tactical markers. To any casual observer, it was simply a beautiful walking aid, perhaps an heirloom or an expensive purchase from some specialty shop. No one looking at it would guess its true nature. The Model 47 Tactical Response Unit had been issued to Malcolm in 1987, during his third year working counterintelligence operations in Prague. The Cold War was still raging, and American operatives in Eastern Europe needed every advantage they could get. The cane had been designed by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, the same brilliant minds who created poison-tipped umbrellas, camera-equipped pigeons, and acoustic surveillance devices hidden in olive pits. Only 12 Model 47s were ever produced. Each one cost more than a luxury car and contained technology that was decades ahead of its time. Inside the hollow mahogany shaft, invisible to X-ray and metal detectors, was a compressed air dart system capable of delivering sedatives, paralytics, or lethal compounds through a nearly silent discharge. The silver handle contained biometric scanners that could capture and transmit fingerprints within 3 seconds of contact. A micro-camera lens, no larger than a pinhead, sat embedded in one of the decorative engravings, capable of capturing high-resolution images in low-light conditions. GPS tracking chips connected to secure satellite networks, allowing the Kane's location to be monitored in real time from Langley headquarters. And, most importantly, a panic button integrated into the handle's curve that would activate Protocol Amber, an emergency response system designed to protect retired field operatives from hostile contact. Malcolm had carried this Kane through Moscow, Beirut, Baghdad, and a dozen other cities that existed in his mission reports, but nowhere else. It had saved his life twice. Once in a Warsaw alley when a Polish intelligence officer had gotten too close, and once in a Damascus safe house when local militia had breached the perimeter. The Kane wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline, a last line of defense, and a connection to a world he'd officially left behind 5 years ago, but had never truly escaped. Across the bar near the entrance, a group of young professionals occupied a high-top table. 3 men in their 30s, dressed in the casual, expensive style of Chicago's creative class, designer jeans, flannel shirts worn over graphic tees, expensive sneakers that cost more than Malcolm's entire outfit. They were loud, animated, celebrating something. Their laughter carried across the room, punctuated by the clink of beer glasses and the occasional shout of triumph. Jared Hollis was the loudest of the 3. At 34, he'd just been promoted to creative director at Weber & Associates, one of Chicago's mid-tier advertising agencies. The promotion came with a significant raise, a corner office, and the kind of validation he'd been chasing since graduating from Northwestern's business school 10 years earlier. He was tall and athletic, with the kind of casual confidence that came from a life relatively free of real hardship. His dark hair was styled in the artfully messy way that required expensive products and regular salon visits. His smile was wide and frequent, the smile of someone who believed the world was fundamentally fair and rewarding. His companions were Marcus Chen, an account executive at the same agency, and Todd Brennan, a childhood friend who worked in finance. They'd already been through 4 rounds of craft IPAs, expensive local brews with names like Hazy Days and Hop Explosion, and the alcohol was making them bold and stupid in the way it often does with men who've never faced real consequences for their actions. "I'm telling you," Jared said, his voice carrying across the bar, "Dennison didn't know what hit him. I walked into that presentation with the Kaufman campaign redesign, and his jaw literally dropped. Literally. He tried to take credit during the client call, but everyone knew it was my work." Marcus laughed, raising his glass. "That's what I'm talking about. You earned this, man. Creative director by 35. That's the goal." Todd, slightly more drunk than the other 2, scanned the bar with the glazed focus of someone looking for entertainment. His eyes landed on Malcolm, sitting alone in his corner booth, seemingly oblivious to the younger crowd's energy. "Check out Grandpa over there," Todd said, nodding toward Malcolm's table. "Dude's been nursing the same drink for an hour. Think he's okay?" Jared followed Todd's gaze, seeing only what most people saw. An old man, alone, probably lonely, passing time in a bar because he had nowhere better to be. The kind of person that young, successful people glanced at and then quickly looked away from, uncomfortable with the reminder of aging and irrelevance. "Probably lives alone," Marcus said with casual cruelty. "No family, comes here every night because it's better than an empty apartment." Something mean stirred in Jared's alcohol-loosened thoughts. Maybe it was the beer. Maybe it was the high of his recent success making him feel invincible. Maybe it was the presence of his friends, offering an audience for whatever stupid thing he might do next. He noticed Malcolm's cane leaning against the booth, its silver handle catching the light. "That's a fancy cane for a guy drinking cheap whiskey in a dive bar," Jared said, his voice taking on a mocking edge. What do you think, custom made? Probably thinks it makes him look distinguished. Todd laughed, encouraging him. Bet it's not even real silver. Probably bought it at some vintage shop trying to look classy. The comments grew bolder, louder. Other patrons glanced over, some uncomfortable, some amused, none intervening. Malcolm's expression didn't change. He took another slow sip of his whiskey, eyes still moving through their patterns. He'd heard every word. He'd heard worse. In Moscow, a KGB operative had put a gun to his head and called him every name in the Russian vocabulary before Malcolm had turned the tables. A few drunk idiots in a Chicago bar didn't even register as a threat. But Jared wasn't done. Emboldened by his friend's laughter and his own inflated ego, he stood up. I'm going to go talk to him. Ask him where he got his fancy stick. Marcus grabbed his arm half-heartedly. Come on, man, leave him alone. But Todd was laughing, egging him on. Do it. Ask him if he needs help getting to the bathroom. Jared shrugged off Marcus's hand and walked toward Malcolm's booth with the exaggerated confidence of someone who'd had just enough to drink to make terrible decisions. He stood in front of the table, swaying slightly, that wide smile plastered across his face. Hey there, Jared said, his tone condescending in the way people speak to children or the elderly. That's a really nice cane you've got. Mind if I take a look at it? Malcolm looked up slowly, his pale blue eyes meeting Jared's. For just a moment, something flickered in that gaze. An assessment, a calculation, a flash of the operator he'd once been. Then it was gone, replaced by the tired resignation of an old man who'd learned not to engage with fools. It's not for show, Malcolm said quietly, his voice gravelly from years of whiskey and cigarettes. Please go back to your friends. But Jared, drunk on beer and arrogance, didn't hear the warning in those words. He heard dismissal. He heard the old man trying to brush him off, and something about that made him angry. Before Marcus could call him back, before Todd could laugh again, before the bartender could notice what was happening, Jared reached down and grabbed the cane, his fingers wrapped around the silver handle, feeling its surprising weight, its perfect balance. He lifted it away from the booth, holding it up like a trophy, turning toward his friends with a triumphant grin. What's an old guy like you need this fancy stick for anyway? Jared said, his voice loud enough for the whole bar to hear. You're sitting down. It's not even supporting any weight. This thing probably cost more than... The sentence died in his throat. Malcolm's hand had moved to his wrist, not his left wrist where a watch should be, but his right wrist where something that looked like a watch sat against his skin. Malcolm pressed a button on its side with his thumb, a movement so subtle and quick that Jared didn't even notice it happening. The bar had gone silent. Even the music from the jukebox seemed to fade into the background. Malcolm's expression still hadn't changed, but his eyes had gone cold and flat, the eyes of a predator watching prey struggle in a trap. You should put that down, Malcolm said, his voice still quiet but carrying a weight that made Jared's smile falter. You should put it down right now, walk back to your table, and forget this happened. For a moment Jared almost listened. Something in Malcolm's tone, something in his eyes, triggered an instinct buried beneath the alcohol and ego, a primal recognition that he'd made a mistake. But then he heard Todd laughing nervously behind him, heard Marcus whispering, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the moment passed. Jared forced his smile back into place. Relax, old man. I'm just looking at it. No need to get all... He stopped. Malcolm had released the button on his watch. Whatever was going to happen had already been set in motion. Malcolm reached out slowly, not threatening, just extending his hand, palm up. Give it back, Malcolm said simply. Jared, suddenly uncomfortable with how serious this had become, how quiet the bar had gotten, thrust the cane back toward Malcolm. Fine. Jesus. It's just a cane. Didn't know it was such a big deal. Malcolm took the cane carefully, his fingers tracing over the silver handle, checking something only he understood. He set it back against the booth, exactly where it had been, then looked up at Jared with something that might have been pity. You have no idea what you just did, Malcolm said quietly. Go home, stay out of trouble, and hope that the people who are about to take an interest in you decide you're just a drunk fool and nothing more. Jared laughed, but it came out hollow and nervous. What's that supposed to mean? You going to call your lawyer or something? Malcolm didn't answer. He just picked up his whiskey and took another sip, his eyes already returning to their pattern. Entrance, exit, windows, faces, hands. The conversation was over. Jared stood there for another awkward moment, then turned and walked back to his table where Marcus and Todd had gone quiet. "What was that about?" Marcus asked. Jared shrugged, trying to recapture his earlier bravado. "Nothing. Just a weird old guy who takes his cane too seriously. Let's get another round." But the energy had gone out of their celebration. They finished one more beer in uncomfortable near silence, then paid their tab and left. As Jared walked out into the October night, he glanced back at Murphy's Tavern one last time. Through the window he could see Malcolm still sitting in his corner booth, cane at his side, watching the door. Jared shook his head and laughed to himself. Just a strange encounter with a strange old man. By tomorrow morning, he'd barely remember it, or so he thought. What Jared didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that at the exact moment his fingerprints had touched that silver handle, they'd been scanned by biometric sensors operating at microscopic precision. Within 3 seconds, those prints had been digitized, compressed, and encrypted. Within 5 seconds, they'd been transmitted via burst transmission to a secure relay station. Within 10 seconds, they'd arrived at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, where they were automatically cross-referenced against every database the agency maintained. Known terrorists, foreign intelligence operatives, persons of interest, diplomatic personnel, criminal organizations, and thousands of other classified lists that existed in secure servers beneath the Virginia countryside. And when Malcolm pressed that button on his watch, he'd activated Protocol Amber, a decades-old security measure designed to protect retired field operatives from hostile contact. It was created after 3 retired CIA officers were assassinated by KGB revenge squads in the 1980s, their murders made to look like accidents or random violence. The agency learned its lesson. Once you enter the shadows, you never truly leave them, and the enemies you make never forget. Protocol Amber meant that within minutes, an alert would reach the CIA's Safety and Security Division. It meant that a threat assessment would be initiated. It meant that every aspect of Jared Hollis's life was about to be examined under a microscope designed to find patterns, connections, and threats that normal people never know exist. Malcolm finished his whiskey, left cash on the table, and walked out of Murphy's Tavern, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. The October wind had picked up, bringing the smell of coming rain. He walked the 3 blocks to his apartment, climbed the stairs to his second-floor unit, and locked the door behind him. He set the cane by the door, made himself a sandwich, and turned on the television to catch the news. His phone rang an hour later. A Virginia area code, though the real origin could be anywhere. Malcolm answered on the 3rd ring. "Delaney." "Malcolm, it's Richardson." The voice was familiar, Charles Richardson, one of Malcolm's former colleagues who'd stayed active after Malcolm retired. Now he worked liaison between field operatives and headquarters, handling exactly these kinds of situations. "Got a Protocol Amber flag on your location about 90 minutes ago. You okay?" "I'm fine," Malcolm said, settling into his worn armchair. "Drunk kid at a bar grabbed my cane, thought it would be funny. Nothing serious." There was a pause on the other end. "You pressed the button." "Habit," Malcolm said. "Better safe than sorry. You know how it is." "I do know how it is," Richardson said, his tone careful. "But you know what happens now. The system's already running. By morning, they'll have a complete workup on this guy. If there's anything there, anything at all that connects him to anyone we care about, this gets bigger." "He's nobody," Malcolm said confidently. "Early 30s, advertising type, too drunk and too stupid to be a threat. Called off the dogs, Charles. It was nothing." "I believe you," Richardson said. "But you know I can't just shut it down. Once Amber activates, it runs its course. Assessment period is 72 hours minimum. If he's clean, it'll all disappear, and he'll never know we looked. If he's not..." He left the sentence unfinished. Malcolm sighed. "Yeah, I know the procedure. Thanks for checking in. Take care of yourself, Malcolm, and maybe find a new bar." The call ended. Malcolm set his phone down and stared at his cane leaning against the wall by the door. 42 years in the agency, and he could still feel the weight of it, The constant vigilance, the perpetual awareness that one mistake could be fatal. He'd thought retirement would bring peace, or at least something approaching normal life. But normal life wasn't possible for men like him. The cane was proof of that. The protocol was proof of that. Once you enter the world of shadows and secrets, you carry it with you forever, like scar tissue that never fully heals. Across the city, Jared Hollis collapsed into bed, his head spinning pleasantly with alcohol and victory. He fell asleep within minutes, dreaming of corner offices and creative awards and all the shallow successes his world valued. He had no idea that in a secure facility in Virginia, computers were already dissecting his entire life, looking for connections and patterns that would determine whether he was a threat or just a fool. The machine had awakened. And once awakened, it was very difficult to stop. But you won't believe what the surveillance teams discovered when they started following him. Stay with us to find out how a simple background check turned into something far more complicated, and why Jared's normal life was about to become anything but normal. If you want to know what happens next, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, drop a comment below, and share this video with anyone who loves stories about the hidden world that exists right alongside our own. The next chapter reveals just how deep the rabbit hole goes when you accidentally cross paths with the intelligence community. Don't go anywhere. 270 miles east of Chicago, in Langley, Virginia, the Central Intelligence Agency's headquarters complex sprawled across 258 acres of carefully maintained grounds. Most Americans knew it only from movies and television shows, the iconic white columns of the original headquarters building, the CIA seal embedded in the lobby floor, the memorial wall with its 140 anonymous stars representing officers who died in service. But beneath those familiar images lay a vast infrastructure that most people never considered. Miles of corridors, thousands of offices, secure server farms containing more classified information than most governments possessed, and specialized divisions handling everything from satellite reconnaissance to psychological operations. On the fourth floor of the new headquarters building, in a section with no exterior windows and badge-controlled access, the Safety and Security Division maintained its operations center 24 hours a day. This was where threats to agency personnel were monitored, assessed, and neutralized. Kidnapping plots against station chiefs in hostile countries, surveillance of CIA officers by foreign intelligence services, security breaches at classified facilities, and Protocol Amber activations from retired field operatives who'd triggered the emergency system built into their defensive equipment. It was 11:43 p.m. Eastern Time when the alert hit Sarah Winter's workstation. She'd been on the night shift for 6 months, a rotation that played havoc with her sleep schedule, but paid an additional 15% and kept her away from the political maneuvering that consumed the day shift. At 29 years old, with a degree in international relations from Georgetown and 3 years as an analyst in the Counterterrorism Center, Sarah understood that important work happened at all hours. Threats didn't respect business hours, and neither did the intelligence community's response to them. Her screen flashed red, accompanied by a soft chime that indicated a priority alert. She clicked the notification, and her screen filled with data. Protocol Amber Activation Operative, Delaney, Malcolm J. Service. Record, Sad Sog, 1980-2020, 42 years active. Current status, retired location, Murphy's Tavern, 3147 N. Milwaukee Ave, Chicago, Isle time of activation, 22:17 CST activation. Code, manual trigger, emergency beacon, biometric contact, positive, 1 unknown subject. Fingerprints captured, yes, processing, GPS tracking, active. Sarah's pulse quickened. Protocol Amber activations were rare, maybe 3 or 4 per year across the entire retired operative population. Most retired officers lived quiet lives, their years of service fading into personal history that they couldn't discuss with anyone outside the community. When an Amber alert came through, it meant something significant had happened. It meant that an operative who'd spent decades in the shadows felt threatened enough to trigger an emergency response system that would bring substantial agency resources to bear on the situation. She clicked through to Malcolm Delaney's service record, though her clearance level only allowed her to see the broad strokes. Special Activities Division, Special Operations Group, the agency's most elite and secretive paramilitary branch. Posted to Prague, Moscow, Beirut, Baghdad, and locations listed only as classified need to know. Decorated with the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, the Intelligence Star, and multiple other commendations that existed in sealed files she couldn't access. His final assignment had been training new SAD recruits at Camp Peary, the facility known informally as The Farm, before his retirement 5 years ago. This wasn't some desk analyst or technical specialist who'd spent his career in safe office buildings. This was a shooter, an operator, someone who'd done the agency's darkest work in its darkest places. If someone like Malcolm Delaney triggered Protocol Amber, you took it seriously. Sarah pulled up the biometric data. The fingerprints captured by Malcolm's cane were already being processed through the CIA's Terrorist Identities Data Mart environment, a massive database containing more than 1.5 million records of known and suspected terrorists, foreign intelligence operatives, and other persons of interest. The system would also cross-reference with FBI databases, Interpol records, State Department diplomatic lists, and dozens of other information sources. The results came back in less than 30 seconds. No matches found in Tide, FBI Most Wanted, Interpol Red Notices, or diplomatic immunity registries. Whoever had touched Malcolm's cane wasn't already on any watch list. That was good news. It meant this probably wasn't a targeted operation by a foreign intelligence service, but it wasn't conclusive. Not yet. Sarah initiated the next phase of analysis. The fingerprints were run through commercial databases, employment background checks, security clearances, financial records, anything that might provide an identity. This took longer. Civilian databases were fragmented, disorganized, maintained by thousands of different entities with no common standards. But the agency had developed sophisticated algorithms that could connect the dots between disparate pieces of information, building profiles from fragments scattered across digital space. 12 minutes after the initial alert, the system returned a name: Jared Michael Hollis. Date of birth, March 14, 1991. Social Security number, 337-82-4516. Current address, 2847 N, Clybourne Avenue, Chicago, IL. Employed at Weber & Associates, advertising agency. Northwestern University graduate 2013, bachelor's degree in business administration. No criminal record, no security clearances, no military service, no travel to countries of intelligence concern. Credit score 742. Outstanding student loan debt $43,000. Car loan $8,500 for a 2022 Honda Accord. Rent $2,100 per month for a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. On the surface, Jared Hollis looked like exactly what he appeared to be. A typical young professional navigating urban life, his biggest concerns probably involving career advancement and whether he could afford a nicer apartment. Nothing in his background suggested any connection to foreign intelligence, organized crime, terrorist organizations, or any of the other threats the agency worried about. But Sarah had been trained not to trust surfaces. One of the most successful moles in CIA history had been a career officer named Aldrich Ames, whose lifestyle far exceeded his government salary, but who'd evaded detection for years because analysts assumed he was just financially irresponsible. Sarah wouldn't make that mistake. She escalated the alert to her supervisor, Thomas Brenner, a 15-year veteran who'd worked everything from counterintelligence to protective operations before settling into the relative calm of safety analysis. He reviewed the information on his own screen, his expression neutral. "What's your assessment?" he asked Sarah. "Unknown at this point," Sarah said professionally. "The subject doesn't fit any profile we'd normally flag. No obvious connections to hostile entities. But the contact was physical. He actually grabbed the cane. That suggests either aggressive behavior or lack of awareness about what he was doing. Could be a drunk civilian who got handsy. Could be a dry run by someone testing our response protocols. We need more information." Brenner nodded slowly. He'd seen enough false alarms over the years to be skeptical, but also enough genuine threats to be cautious. "What does Delaney say?" "Chicago field office called him about 20 minutes ago. He says it was nothing. Drunk kid at a bar, no threat. But he still pressed the button. He pressed the button because 40 years of training told him to press the button, Brenner said. Doesn't mean his conscious assessment is wrong, but it doesn't mean we ignore it either. Initiate a Level 3 assessment. 72-hour window. If Hollis is clean, it disappears from the system. If anything pops, we escalate. Sarah felt a momentary pang of guilt. Jared Hollis had no idea that his entire life was about to be examined by some of the most sophisticated surveillance and analysis systems on Earth. But that guilt was quickly suppressed. This was the job. This was how threats were identified before they could materialize. Better to investigate 100 innocent people than miss one genuine danger. I'll coordinate with Chicago field office, Sarah said. Surveillance, digital monitoring, background interviews, full package. Approved, Brenner said. And Sarah, keep this quiet. Amber protocols are sensitive. If this turns out to be nothing, we don't want congressional oversight committees asking why we're surveilling American citizens over bar fights. Sarah understood. The agency walked a constant tightrope between protecting national security and respecting civil liberties. Most Americans would be horrified to know how much information the CIA could access, how thoroughly a person could be investigated without their knowledge, how extensive the surveillance networks were that operated in the shadows of constitutional protections. It was legal, barely, through various national security statutes and secret court orders, but it wasn't something the agency advertised. Over the next hour, Sarah coordinated with the CIA's Chicago field office, sending them Jared's identification, his address, his employment information, and authorization for comprehensive surveillance. She also activated the agency's Technical Operations Division to begin digital monitoring, mirroring Jared's smartphone, accessing his computer through remote network vulnerabilities, monitoring his email and social media accounts, tracking his credit card transactions, and logging his location data through cell tower triangulation and GPS tracking. All of this was authorized under a classified interpretation of Executive Order 12333, which gave the CIA broad authorities to collect foreign intelligence and protect its personnel. The fact that Jared was an American citizen complicated things slightly. The agency wasn't supposed to spy on Americans without a court order, but there were loopholes, carefully constructed legal frameworks that allowed incidental collection when Americans came into contact with legitimate intelligence targets. Malcolm Delaney, as a retired officer who'd handled classified information and covert operations, was considered a protected person. Anyone who interacted with him in a potentially hostile manner could be investigated. The letter of the law was followed. The spirit of it was more ambiguous. By 1:30 a.m., Jared's phone had been compromised. It happened remotely, through a sophisticated exploit that took advantage of vulnerabilities in the phone's operating system, vulnerabilities that the CIA had paid security researchers to find and keep secret rather than report to the phone's manufacturer. To Jared, it would look like a routine software update, maybe a slight delay in performance, nothing concerning. He'd never know that every call, text, email, and app usage was now being logged and transmitted to servers in Langley. His social media accounts were scraped: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Every photo, every post, every comment was archived and analyzed. Algorithms looked for patterns, radicalization indicators, anti-government sentiment, connections to known persons of interest, travel to sensitive locations, financial irregularities. His LinkedIn profile showed a steady career progression, nothing unusual. His Facebook was mostly pictures of social events, sports bars, weekend trips to Wisconsin, relationship photos with a woman named Madison Foster who worked in marketing. His Instagram showcased amateur photography, Chicago architecture, food from trendy restaurants, sunset photos from the lakefront. Normal. Utterly, completely normal. Completely. By 3 a.m., his financial records had been pulled through automated interfaces with credit reporting agencies and banking institutions. The CIA maintained data sharing agreements with major financial institutions under national security letter authorities, legal instruments that forced banks to provide information while forbidding them from disclosing that they'd done so. Jared's finances were unremarkable. Salary deposits every 2 weeks, rent payments on schedule, student loan payments, car loan payments, credit card charges for restaurants, gas, online shopping, gym membership. He lived paycheck to paycheck like millions of other Americans, spending slightly more than he should on dining out and entertainment, but nothing that suggested hidden income streams or contact with foreign entities. By 5 a.m., Chicago field office had deployed a surveillance team to Jared's apartment building. 2 officers in an unmarked car parked across the street, watching the building's entrance, equipped with long-range cameras and listening equipment. Another officer set up in a coffee shop with a view of the building's rear exit. This was passive surveillance, just observation and documentation. If Jared left his apartment, they'd follow him, logging his movements, photographing everyone he contacted, building a pattern of life analysis that would reveal his routines, his associations, his vulnerabilities. All of this happened while Jared slept peacefully in his Lincoln Park apartment, completely unaware that his life had become the subject of intensive intelligence collection by one of the world's most powerful security organizations. At Murphy's Tavern, the night Malcolm pressed that button on his watch, he'd set in motion a machinery that was nearly impossible to stop. The Model 47 Tactical Response Unit wasn't just a defensive weapon, it was an intelligence collection platform that turned every hostile contact into an information operation. The biometric scanners didn't just identify threats, they fed information into systems that could dissect a person's entire life in a matter of hours. The technology had been cutting edge in 1987 when the Canes were first issued. By today's standards, it was almost primitive. But it still worked, and more importantly, it was connected to infrastructure that had only grown more sophisticated over the decades. The GPS tracking that once required a briefcase-sized transmitter now operated through chips smaller than a fingernail. The biometric scanners that once needed minutes to process prints now did it in seconds. The communication systems that once relied on burst transmissions to spy satellites now connected through encrypted channels over civilian cellular networks, invisible among billions of normal data packets. The Cane was a relic from another era, but it had been continuously updated, its internal systems replaced and upgraded during regular maintenance intervals. Malcolm brought it to Langley once a year, ostensibly for equipment inspection, where technicians would service the mechanical components while upgrading the electronic systems. The wood was original, the silver handle was original, but everything inside was state-of-art intelligence technology, maintained at taxpayer expense because the agency never forgot its people, even after they retired. Or maybe especially after they retired. Retired officers knew too much. They'd seen too much. They carried secrets that could damage national security or get active operatives killed if those secrets fell into the wrong hands. Protecting retired officers wasn't just about loyalty. It was about operational security, about ensuring that 40 years of classified information didn't walk out the door undefended when someone earned their retirement. Malcolm understood this better than most. He'd been briefed on retired officers who'd been targeted by foreign intelligence services, offered money or threatened with exposure, pressured to reveal information about operations, identities, methods. Some had resisted, some had cooperated. The ones who cooperated usually ended up in federal prison, their pensions revoked, their reputations destroyed. The ones who resisted sometimes ended up dead, their murders made to look like accidents or random violence. The cane was his protection against that fate, and he'd just activated it over a drunk kid in a bar. By dawn, Sarah Winters had compiled a preliminary assessment report, summarizing everything known about Jared Hollis and her evaluation of the threat level. Her conclusion: subject appears to be a civilian with no intelligence connections or security concerns. Incident likely alcohol-related poor judgment. However, recommend continuing Level 3 assessment for full 72-hour period to rule out more sophisticated cover or unknown associations. Subject should be considered low threat, but not zero threat until investigation concludes. The report was filed in classified systems and distributed to relevant personnel. Chicago Field Office, Safety and Security Division leadership, an analyst at the National Counterterrorism Center who tracked potential domestic threats, and a liaison officer who briefed senior agency leadership each morning on overnight developments. By the time Jared woke up Saturday morning with a headache and fuzzy memories of the previous night, Dozens of intelligence professionals had already spent hours examining his life. Surveillance teams were in position. His phone was compromised. His financial records had been accessed. His social media had been archived. Algorithms were analyzing his behavior patterns, building predictive models of his likely actions, assessing whether he posed any risk to national security, and he had absolutely no idea any of it was happening. He showered, made coffee, checked his phone, nothing unusual except a notification about a software update that had installed overnight. He vaguely remembered the scene at the bar, grabbing the old man's cane, the weird comment the guy had made. Hope the people who are about to take an interest in you decide you're just a drunk fool. What had that meant? Just an old guy being dramatic, probably. Jared dismissed it from his mind, got dressed and headed out to meet Madison for brunch at a place in Wicker Park they both liked. He walked out of his building, turned left on Clybourne Avenue, and headed toward the L train station. Across the street, in an unmarked sedan, Officer Martinez from Chicago Field Office snapped a series of photographs with a telephoto lens. He spoke quietly into a radio. Subject mobile, heading north on Clybourne. Intercept team acknowledge. 2 blocks ahead, another officer adjusted his position at a bus stop, ready to pick up the visual if Jared turned the corner. The machine was working exactly as designed, invisible and efficient. Jared walked through the crisp October morning, thinking about his promotion, about impressing Madison with his success story, about the corner office that would soon bear his name. He had no idea that every step he took was being photographed, every movement logged, every person he passed being identified and cross-referenced. The weapon had awakened, and its scope extended far beyond a simple walking cane in an Irish pub. But what the surveillance teams didn't expect was what they were about to discover. Because sometimes when you start digging into someone's life, you find connections you never anticipated, and sometimes those connections change everything. What did they find? How did a routine background check suddenly become complicated? And why did Jared's perfectly normal life start to look suspicious through the lens of intelligence analysis? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the invisible cage begins to tighten and Jared starts to realize that something is terribly wrong. What's your opinion about what you've seen so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. Jared Hollis woke up Monday morning with a vague sense of unease that he couldn't quite explain. The weekend had passed normally enough, brunch with Madison on Saturday, a lazy Sunday watching football and catching up on work emails, but something felt off in a way he couldn't articulate. It was like the feeling you get when you've forgotten something important, but can't remember what it is. A low-level anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of normal life. He went through his usual morning routine. Shower, coffee, toast with peanut butter, checking his phone for overnight emails and social media updates. His apartment was small but well-maintained, with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in the grey October light. Posters from Northwestern football games hung on one wall, gifts from his college years. A bookshelf held business and marketing books he'd bought, but mostly hadn't read, their spines still crisp and unbroken. The coffee table was covered with trade magazines, Adweek, Communication Arts, Fast Company, the tools of his industry that he skimmed during his commute. Nothing was different. Everything was exactly as it had been last week and the week before, but that feeling persisted, like being watched from just outside your peripheral vision. At 7:45 a.m., he left his apartment and walked the 3 blocks to the Armitage Brown Line station. Chicago's morning commuters filled the sidewalks, professionals in business casual, construction workers heading to job sites, students with backpacks, everyone moving with the purposeful speed of people with places to be. Jared joined the flow, his mind already turning toward the day ahead. A client presentation at 10 a.m., a team meeting at 2 p.m., reviews of campaign mock-ups that had come in over the weekend. He descended the stairs into the L station, tapped his Ventra card against the reader, and pushed through the turnstile onto the platform. A train was approaching, its headlight visible in the tunnel. About 20 other people waited on the platform, most staring at their phones, a few reading newspapers, everyone practicing the studied indifference that urban life requires. Jared glanced to his left and saw a man in a grey jacket standing near the far end of the platform. There was nothing particularly notable about him. Mid-40s, average build, generic business casual clothing, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second thought. But something about the way he was standing caught Jared's attention. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading anything. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, seemingly waiting, but not in the relaxed way people usually wait for trains. The train arrived, and Jared boarded along with most of the other passengers. He grabbed a pole near the door as the car filled up. Through the window, he saw the man in the grey jacket boarding the car behind his, one door down. The doors closed, and the train lurched forward into the tunnel. Jared told himself he was being paranoid. Probably just someone else commuting to work, nothing more. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through news headlines, trying to shake off the unease. The train made its stops: Fullerton, Belmont, Addison. At each station, Jared casually glanced through the windows into the next car. The man in the grey jacket was still there, in roughly the same position, not moving toward the doors at any of the stops. When Jared's stop at Washington came up, he exited with a crowd of loop-bound workers. He walked toward the stairs, then risked a quick look back. The man in the grey jacket had also gotten off the train. He was about 30 feet behind, following the same flow of commuters toward the exit. Coincidence, Jared told himself firmly. Thousands of people got off at Washington every morning. It didn't mean anything. But as Jared emerged onto Washington Street and walked the 2 blocks to his office building, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still behind him. He didn't turn around to check, didn't want to be that paranoid person who acts suspicious over nothing. Instead, he focused on walking normally, getting to his building, getting into the familiar safety of his workplace. Weber and Associates occupied the 10th and 11th floors of a glass and steel building in the Loop, the kind of modern office space that looked impressive in recruitment materials and client pitches. Jared badged into the building, rode the elevator up, and stepped into the agency's reception area with its minimalist furniture and large format prints of successful ad campaigns. The familiar environment should have been calming, but that unease persisted. "Morning, Jared," called Angela from reception, her usual cheerful smile in place. "How was your weekend?" "Good, thanks," Jared replied, forcing normalcy into his voice. "Yours?" "Great. My daughter's soccer team won their tournament." He made appropriate congratulatory noises and headed to his office, not the corner office yet, but a decent-sized space with a window view of the street below. He set his bag down, booted up his computer, and tried to focus on the day ahead. But his computer was acting strange. Programs seemed to take longer to load than usual. His email client opened, then froze for several seconds before displaying his inbox. When he opened a browser, it redirected briefly to a blank page before loading his home page. These were minor glitches, the kind of thing that happens with any computer, but after the weird morning and the persistent feeling of unease, they felt significant. Jared tried to shake it off. He was being ridiculous. He'd had too much to drink Friday night, he'd been rude to an old man, and now his guilty conscience was manifesting as paranoia. That's all this was, his brain creating patterns where none existed, seeing threats that weren't there. He forced himself to focus on work, pulling up the presentation materials for his 10:00 a.m. meeting. Weber and Associates was pitching a campaign for a regional restaurant chain looking to expand into new markets. Jared's concept involved social media influencer partnerships, combined with localized traditional advertising, emphasizing authenticity and community connection. He'd been working on it for weeks, and the presentation was solid. The meeting went well. The client seemed engaged, asked good questions, and tentatively approved moving to the next phase. Jared felt a momentary sense of accomplishment, the validation that came from professional success. But as he walked back to his office afterward, he passed a window overlooking Washington Street and glanced down at the traffic below. A grey sedan was parked across the street, in a spot with a clear view of his building's entrance. He couldn't see the driver clearly from 10 floors up, but something about it triggered his already heightened anxiety. How long had that car been there? Was it the same one he'd noticed that morning near his apartment? He tried to remember if he'd even seen a car near his apartment, but the details were fuzzy. "This is insane," he told himself. "You're losing it over nothing." But throughout the afternoon, that car remained in his thoughts. During his 2 p.m. team meeting, he found himself distracted, only half listening to discussions about timelines and deliverables. His colleague Hannah asked if he was okay, and he lied and said he was fine, just tired. At 4:30 p.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. The grey sedan was still there. As he watched, another car, a dark blue SUV, pulled up behind it and parked. 2 vehicles, both positioned with clear views of his building. Were they together? Was he imagining a connection that didn't exist? Jared pulled out his phone and opened his camera, zooming in as much as possible to photograph the vehicles and their license plates. The images were grainy from the distance and angle, but he could make out most of the numbers. He didn't know what he planned to do with the information, but having it made him feel slightly more in control. What Jared didn't know was that his phone's camera activation had been logged by the CIA's monitoring system. An algorithm noted that he'd photographed surveillance vehicles and flagged it as potentially significant behavior. Sarah Winters, reviewing the day's activity logs from her desk in Langley, saw the alert and frowned. Why would someone photograph parked cars? Was he aware of the surveillance? Had someone tipped him off? Or was it just paranoia, the normal human response to feeling watched? She made a note in the file. Subject may be surveillance aware. Recommend increased caution in physical monitoring. The message was relayed to the Chicago field office within minutes. Jared left work at 5:30 p.m., earlier than his usual departure time. He told himself it was because he'd gotten in early, but really he just wanted to get home to be behind a locked door where he could think clearly. He took a different route back to the L station, doubling back on one block to see if anyone followed. He didn't notice anyone obvious, but in a city of millions, how could you really tell? On the train ride home, he scanned every face, looking for the man in the grey jacket or anyone else who seemed to be paying attention to him. Everyone looked normal, tired commuters heading home after work, students with headphones, tourists consulting their phones for directions. No one met his eyes. No one seemed interested in him at all. He got off at Armitage and walked home through streets that suddenly felt less familiar, less safe. Every person he passed was a potential threat, every parked car a possible surveillance post. By the time he reached his apartment building, his heart was racing and his hands were shaking slightly. Inside his apartment, he locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm down. This was absurd. He was a mid-level creative director at an advertising agency. Nobody cared about him enough to follow him or surveil him. The encounter with the old man Friday night had been nothing, just a drunk mistake, already forgotten by everyone except him and his guilty conscience. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Jared opened his laptop and started searching online. How to tell if you're being followed? Signs of surveillance. Is someone tracking my phone? The search results were a mix of security advice, conspiracy theory forums, and articles about privacy in the digital age. He learned that modern smartphones could be compromised remotely, that law enforcement agencies had sophisticated surveillance capabilities, that there were dozens of ways someone could track your movements without you knowing. The more he read, the more paranoid he became. Could someone be tracking his phone, his computer? Were there cameras he didn't know about? His apartment suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fishbowl, transparent to observers he couldn't see. At CIA headquarters, Sarah Winters noted another alert. Jared's search history had been flagged for including multiple queries related to surveillance detection. This was significant. Normal people didn't suddenly start researching how to detect surveillance unless they had a reason to think they were being watched. Either Jared had become paranoid for no reason, possible but unusual, or someone had warned him, or he'd noticed the surveillance teams, or he had training in counter-surveillance that hadn't shown up in his background check. Sarah updated her assessment. Subject's behavior suggests awareness of surveillance. Unclear if this represents operational training or natural paranoia. Recommend enhanced digital monitoring and consideration of active measures to assess subject's capabilities and intentions. The phrase active measures was intelligence jargon for taking actions designed to provoke a response, to see how someone reacted under pressure. It could mean many things, from overt approaches to engineered situations that forced the subject to reveal their true nature. Sarah wasn't recommending anything extreme, not yet, but she was recommending they move beyond passive observation. Her supervisor, Thomas Brenner, reviewed the updated assessment and approved more aggressive investigation. "Let's see what he does," Brenner said. "If he's just paranoid, he'll calm down in a few days. If he's something else, this pressure will make him move, and we'll see where he goes." That night, Jared barely slept. Every sound in his apartment building became a potential threat. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere, the hum of the elevator. He kept checking his phone, half expecting to see evidence of tampering, though he wouldn't know what to look for even if it was there. His mind raced through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. Who was the old man at the bar? Why had he made that strange comment about people taking an interest in Jared? Was this some kind of organized crime thing? Had he accidentally offended someone dangerous? Or was it something else, something he couldn't even imagine? By Tuesday morning, Jared looked haggard. He'd gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep. His eyes were red-rimmed and his hands shook slightly as he made coffee. Madison had texted him the previous night, asking if he wanted to get dinner, and he'd made an excuse about being busy with work. He couldn't see her right now, couldn't pretend everything was normal when his world felt like it was unraveling. He took a rideshare to work instead of the L, thinking that would somehow make surveillance harder. The driver was quiet, which Jared appreciated, but as they drove through morning traffic, Jared found himself watching the cars behind them, looking for vehicles that stayed with them too long, following their route too closely. Was that dark sedan 3 cars back following them? It turned when they turned at Fullerton, but then it continued straight when they turned again at Webster, disappearing from view. Just normal traffic, or was it? By the time Jared arrived at his office, he was a wreck. His anxiety was written all over his face, visible enough that multiple colleagues asked if he was okay. He brushed them off with vague explanations about not sleeping well, stress at work, nothing serious. But it was serious, because the invisible cage was tightening in ways he could sense but not see, and every attempt to understand what was happening only made things worse. At lunch, Jared did something reckless. He took the elevator down to the lobby, walked out onto Washington Street and approached the grey sedan he'd photographed the previous day. It was still there, or a similar one, he couldn't be sure. He walked right up to the driver's side window and peered in. The car was empty, no one inside, nothing visible on the seats. From half a block away, Officer Martinez watched through binoculars and immediately radioed to his team. "Subject just approached Unit 3 vehicle. Repeat, subject approached surveillance vehicle directly. He's looking inside. He knows he's being watched." Jared walked away from the car, his heart pounding. Finding it empty didn't reassure him. If anything, it confirmed that something was going on. Cars didn't just sit in the same spot for days in downtown Chicago without a reason. He returned to his office and sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening. And there was only one person who might be able to tell him. He needed to find the old man from Murphy's Tavern, the man with the cane, the man who'd looked at him with those cold, knowing eyes and said that people would be taking an interest in him. That man knew something. And Jared needed to know it too, even if the truth was worse than his worst paranoid imaginings, because at least the truth would be something concrete, something he could understand and maybe fight against. This invisible pressure, this sense of being watched and followed and investigated by forces he couldn't see, it was unbearable. Jared made his decision. After work, he would go back to Murphy's Tavern. He would find that old man, and he would demand answers. What he didn't know was that Malcolm Delaney had been expecting him, had known with the certainty of someone who'd spent 40 years reading human behavior that the scared young man would eventually come looking for him, and Malcolm was ready for that conversation, ready to decide once and for all whether Jared Hollis was a threat, a fool, or something in between. What happens when they finally meet again face to face? What will Malcolm reveal about the machinery that Jared has accidentally triggered? And can the invisible cage be opened once it's closed, or is Jared's life changed forever? Thank you so much for staying with us this far. You're amazing, and trust me, the best is yet to come. The next chapter brings the confrontation you've been waiting for, where secrets are revealed, and the true scope of Jared's situation becomes terrifyingly clear. Don't go anywhere. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of cold rain that makes Chicago feel especially miserable in late October. Jared left his office at 5:01 p.m. sharp, ignoring the curious looks from colleagues who'd noticed his deteriorating condition over the past 2 days. He looked like hell, and he knew it. 2 nights of barely sleeping, constant stress, the persistent feeling of being watched. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled on his jacket, and his reflection in the elevator's polished doors showed someone who'd aged years in mere days. He took a rideshare to Logan Square, directing the driver to drop him off a block away from Murphy's Tavern. Some instinct, born from paranoia or genuine understanding, he couldn't say, told him not to make his destination too obvious. He walked the final block through cold rain, collar turned up, hands jammed in his pockets. Murphy's Tavern looked exactly as it had Friday night, warm light spilling from the windows, the faded shamrock painted on the door, the neon Guinness sign flickering in the window. Jared stood outside for a moment, gathering his courage, then pushed through the door. The bar was moderately busy for a Tuesday evening, maybe a dozen people scattered among the booths and bar stools, the after-work crowd looking to take the edge off another day. The television above the bar showed a basketball game with the sound muted. Someone had queued up classic rock on the jukebox, and Springsteen's Thunder Road played at a volume just loud enough to hear, but not so loud you couldn't talk. Jared's eyes went immediately to the corner booth, the one where the old man had been sitting Friday night. It was empty. Disappointment and relief washed through him in equal measure. Maybe the old man only came in on weekends. Maybe he'd never see him again. Maybe this was all for nothing. But then a voice came from behind him. "You came back. I wondered if you would." Jared spun around. Malcolm Delaney stood near the bar, a fresh whiskey in one hand, his cane in the other. Up close, in better light than Friday night's dim bar atmosphere, Jared could see more detail. The deep lines around Malcolm's eyes that spoke of years in harsh sunlight, the slight scar along his jawline, the way he stood with his weight balanced despite the cane, as if it were a tool rather than a necessity. His eyes, pale blue and unnervingly steady, studied Jared with an intensity that made him want to look away. "I need to talk to you," Jared said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please, something's happening, something's wrong, and I think it's because of what I did Friday night." Malcolm nodded slowly, unsurprised. He gestured toward his usual corner booth. "Sit down. Let's talk." They walked to the booth and slid into opposite sides. Malcolm set his whiskey down carefully, his cane resting against the table within easy reach. For a long moment, he just looked at Jared, that same assessing gaze, as if determining whether Jared was worth his time or represented some kind of threat. Finally, Malcolm spoke. "Tell me what's been happening." The words came out of Jared in a rush. The feeling of being followed, the man in the grey jacket on the train, the cars parked outside his office building, his phone acting strangely, his computer freezing, the overwhelming sense that his life was no longer private. He knew he sounded paranoid, maybe even crazy, but once he started talking, he couldn't stop. All the fear and confusion of the past days poured out in a torrent of words. Malcolm listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Jared finally ran out of words and sat there breathing hard, almost on the verge of tears, Malcolm took a slow sip of his whiskey. "You're not crazy," Malcolm said quietly. "Everything you're describing is real. You are being followed, your phone is compromised, your life is under surveillance, and yes, it's because of what you did Friday night." Jared felt a strange mix of vindication and terror. He'd been right, but being right meant this nightmare was real. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "I was drunk. I was stupid. I grabbed your cane for like 10 seconds. Why would that? How could that?" He couldn't even finish the question. Malcolm picked up his cane, turning it slowly in the dim light so Jared could see the intricate engravings on the silver handle, the way it was weighted, the craftsmanship that suggested it was much more than a simple mobility aid. "This isn't just a cane," Malcolm said, echoing words he'd spoken Friday night but with more detail now. "It's a defensive weapon developed by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology in the 1980s. Inside this wood are biometric scanners, GPS tracking systems, chemical dispensers, communication arrays, and a panic button connected to the agency's emergency response network. It's kept me alive in Moscow, Prague, Beirut, Baghdad, and places that don't appear on any map in operations that don't exist in any official record. Jared stared at the cane, then at Malcolm. Your CIA was, Malcolm corrected. Retired 5 years ago after 42 years of service. But that's the thing about this life, you never really retire. You just step back from active operations. The agency still protects us, still monitors threats against us, still treats us as assets that need to be secured. But I'm not a threat, Jared protested, hearing the desperation in his own voice. I work in advertising. I've never been involved in anything like what you're talking about. I don't know anything about spies or CIA or... I know that, Malcolm interrupted gently. Or at least I'm fairly certain of it, but the system doesn't know that, not yet. When you grabbed this cane, you triggered protocols that were put in place to protect people like me. Your fingerprints were scanned, uploaded to databases, cross-referenced against every watch list the intelligence community maintains. When nothing popped up immediately, they initiated a deeper investigation. Level 3 assessment, that's what they call it. 72 hours of comprehensive surveillance to determine if you're a genuine threat or just an unfortunate civilian who made a mistake. Jared's mind reeled. 72 hours? It's been, what, 4 days since Friday? About 80 hours, Malcolm confirmed, which means the assessment period is almost over. If they haven't found anything by now, and I'm guessing they haven't, based on the fact that you're here talking to me instead of in a federal detention facility, then the surveillance will start winding down soon. How soon? Jared asked desperately. Days, maybe a week. They'll want to be sure. But if you're clean, if there's nothing in your life that connects you to foreign intelligence, organized crime, terrorist organizations, or any of the other things they worry about, then eventually they'll close the file and move on. You'll become a footnote in a classified database that maybe 3 people will ever read. Jared wanted to feel relief but couldn't quite manage it. And if they don't think I'm clean, Malcolm's expression darkened slightly. Then things get more complicated, more intrusive. They might bring you in for questioning. Voluntary at first, though that word doesn't mean much when the CIA asks. They might contact your employer, your friends, your family, asking questions that make everyone wonder what you've done wrong. They might keep the surveillance active for months, watching everything you do, everyone you meet, everywhere you go. This is insane, Jared said, though without much heat. He was too tired for anger. This is America, don't I have rights? Isn't there something illegal about all this? Malcolm smiled without humor. There are laws, constitutional protections, but there are also national security statutes, classified legal opinions, secret court orders. The agency walks a very fine line, but they're good at walking that line without crossing it, or at least without being caught crossing it. You're not being arrested or detained. You're not being charged with anything. You're just being observed. Until they're satisfied, you're not a threat. To who? To what? Jared demanded. To me, Malcolm said simply. To other retired officers. To ongoing operations that might be compromised if the wrong people identified us. To national security as a concept. The agency has a long memory, Jared. They remember the retired officers who were killed by KGB revenge squads in the 80s. They remember the ones who were compromised by foreign intelligence services, blackmailed or bribed into revealing classified information. They remember every failure to protect their people, and they're determined not to let it happen again. Jared slumped in his seat, the enormity of it washing over him. I just wanted to impress my friends, that's all. I saw an old guy with a fancy cane and thought it would be funny to... God, I'm such an idiot. You made a mistake, Malcolm said, not unkindly. A drunken, thoughtless mistake, but not a malicious one and not a criminal one. The system doesn't know that yet, but it will. Just give it time. Time, Jared repeated hollowly. How am I supposed to live with this, knowing they're watching everything I do, knowing that every phone call, every email, every person I talk to is being logged somewhere? The same way we all do, Malcolm said. You get used to it, or at least you learn to live with it. Privacy is largely an illusion anyway. Most people just don't know how much they're already being watched by corporations, data brokers, social media companies. The intelligence community is just more focused, more thorough, more capable. but the principle is the same. They sat in silence for a moment, Springsteen replaced by Tom Petty on the jukebox. The rain had picked up outside, drumming against the windows. Someone at the bar laughed at something, the sound jarringly normal in the midst of their conversation. "What happens now?" Jared finally asked. "Now you go home," Malcolm said. "You go back to your life, you do your job, see your girlfriend, act as normal as possible. Don't do anything stupid like trying to find the surveillance teams or confront them. Don't make suspicious phone calls or travel to unusual places. Just be the person your background check says you are, a mid-level advertising executive with no intelligence connections. If you do that, if you just live normally, they'll conclude you're exactly what you appear to be, and this will end." "And if I can't do that?" Jared asked. "If I can't just pretend everything is normal while knowing they're watching?" Malcolm's expression softened slightly. "Then you'll make them think you're hiding something, and the investigation will escalate. I've seen it happen. Innocent people who panic under surveillance, who start acting guilty because they're scared, who create suspicions where none existed. Don't be that person, Jared. I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible, but it's your best option." Jared nodded slowly, not sure he could actually do what Malcolm was suggesting, but understanding he had no choice. Can you help? Can you tell them I'm not a threat?" "I already have," Malcolm said. "I told my former colleagues that you're just a drunk kid who made a stupid mistake. But my word only carries so much weight. They trust me, but they trust their procedures more. The assessment has to run its course. That's just how the system works." "The system," Jared said bitterly. "The system that can destroy someone's life over grabbing a walking stick." "The system that keeps people like me alive," Malcolm countered. "The system that protects the people who protect this country. It's not perfect. It makes mistakes. It invades privacy and sometimes ruins innocent lives. But it also catches real threats, real enemies, real dangers. You just happen to get caught in its gears through bad luck and poor judgment." Jared wanted to argue, wanted to rail against the injustice of it, but he was too exhausted. He'd come here looking for answers, and he'd gotten them, but the answers didn't make anything better. They just made the nightmare concrete, gave it shape and name and terrifying specifics. "I should go," Jared said, starting to slide out of the booth. "Jared," Malcolm said, stopping him, "I am sorry this happened to you, truly. If I could make it stop with a phone call, I would. But I can't. All I can do is give you advice. Be patient, be normal, and this will pass. You're going to be okay." Jared wanted to believe him. He nodded, mumbled something that might have been thanks, and walked out of Murphy's Tavern back into the cold October rain. From a car parked half a block away, Officer Martinez watched Jared emerge from the bar and start walking down Milwaukee Avenue. He immediately radioed his team. "Subject just exited Murphy's Tavern after approximately 40-minute meeting with Delaney. Appeared distressed. We should anticipate changed behavior." Back at Langley, Sarah Winters received the report and updated her assessment file. The meeting between Jared and Malcolm was significant. It suggested that Jared had figured out enough to seek answers directly from the source. That showed intelligence, resourcefulness, maybe even training. Or it showed exactly what it appeared to be: a scared person looking for explanations. The assessment period was almost over. In another 20 hours, unless something significant changed, they'd have to make a decision: continue investigating Jared as a potential threat, or close the file and move on. The evidence so far suggested he was clean. His background contained nothing suspicious. His behavior was consistent with someone who'd realized he was under surveillance and had panicked. His meeting with Malcolm appeared to be exactly what Malcolm said it was: a drunk kid looking for answers. But there was one more test Sarah wanted to run, one more way to see how Jared reacted under pressure. With her supervisor's approval, she initiated what intelligence professionals called a bump, an engineered encounter designed to provoke a response and gauge someone's true nature. The next morning, Jared would get a visitor, and how he handled that visit would determine whether this nightmare finally ended or whether it was just beginning. What happens when the CIA decides to test Jared directly? Who comes to visit him and what do they want? The story is almost at its end, but I promise you, the final chapter brings the resolution and answers you need. If you've made it this far, you're clearly enjoying this story. And that means you should absolutely subscribe to our channel and hit that like button so you don't miss our next incredible stories. Stick with us to the very end. You deserve to know how this all resolves. Wednesday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of brilliant October day that makes you forget. Chicago's winter is just around the corner. Jared had managed maybe 4 hours of sleep after returning from Murphy's Tavern, his mind churning through everything Malcolm had told him. The knowledge that the surveillance was real, that it had a name, Level 3 assessment, and that it would eventually end, provided some relief, but not enough to let him truly rest. He went through his morning routine mechanically: shower, coffee, checking his compromised phone that he now understood was feeding every action back to analysts in Virginia. The knowledge felt like a weight pressing down on him, making every simple act feel performed, observed, judged. But Malcolm's advice echoed in his head. Be normal. Be patient. Don't act guilty. At 9:30 a.m., 15 minutes before he planned to leave for work, there was a knock on his apartment door. Jared froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Nobody knocked on his door at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning. Deliveries were left in the lobby. His girlfriend had a key. His neighbors weren't the dropping by type. For a moment, he considered not answering, pretending he wasn't home. But the knock came again, firmer this time. "Mr. Hollis, I need to speak with you. It's important." The voice was female, professional, carrying the kind of authority that suggested not answering wasn't really an option. Jared set his coffee down and walked to the door, checking the peephole first. A woman stood in the hallway, early 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a dark pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked exactly like what Jared had always imagined a federal agent would look like: professional, serious, vaguely intimidating without being overtly threatening. Jared's hands shook slightly as he unlocked the door and opened it, leaving the chain engaged. "Yes?" The woman held up identification in a leather wallet, a badge with the seal of the Central Intelligence Agency, a photo ID card with her picture and the name Sarah Winters, analyst. "Mr. Hollis, my name is Sarah Winters. I'm with the CIA's Safety and Security Division. May I come in? I'd like to talk with you about an incident that occurred last Friday evening at Murphy's Tavern." There it was, the nightmare-made flesh standing in his hallway, asking to come into his apartment. Jared's first instinct was to refuse, to close the door and call a lawyer, to do anything except let the CIA into his home. But he remembered Malcolm's advice. Don't act guilty. Don't act like you're hiding something. "Do I have a choice?" Jared asked, his voice coming out more steady than he felt. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Yes, you do. This is voluntary. I'm not here to arrest you or accuse you of anything. I'm here to have a conversation that I think will resolve some concerns on both sides. But if you'd prefer to do this through lawyers, that's your right." Jared considered his options and realized he had none, not really. If he refused to talk, it would look suspicious, would extend the investigation, would make everything worse. And part of him, exhausted, frightened, desperate for this to be over, just wanted to answer whatever questions they had so the nightmare could end. He slid the chain off and opened the door. "Come in." Sarah entered, taking in the apartment with a quick professional scan, looking for threats, assessing the environment, cataloging details. Jared noticed her eyes lingering on his laptop, his phone charging on the counter, the pile of advertising trade magazines. Everything was being observed, evaluated, added to whatever file they had on him. "Can I get you coffee?" Jared asked, falling back on social niceties because he didn't know what else to do. "No, thank you," Sarah said, settling onto his couch and opening her portfolio. "I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I know you need to get to work." The casualness of her knowledge about his schedule was somehow more unnerving than anything else. Of course they knew his schedule, they knew everything. Jared sat in the chair across from her, trying to maintain a calm exterior. "What do you want to know?" Sarah pulled out a notepad, actual paper, Jared noticed, not a tablet or computer. "Let's start with Friday night. You were at Murphy's Tavern with two friends, Marcus Chen and Todd Brennan. Can you walk me through what happened with Malcolm Delaney?" Hearing Malcolm's full name for the first time was jarring. Jared took a breath and told the story as honestly as he could, celebrating his promotion, drinking too much, making stupid comments about the old man in the corner, approaching his table, grabbing his cane as a joke, Malcolm's strange warning, returning the cane and leaving. He didn't embellish or minimize, just told it exactly as it had happened. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When Jared finished, she looked up and met his eyes directly. "Why did you grab his cane?" Jared felt his face flush with shame. "I was drunk. I thought it would be funny. My friends were laughing and I wanted to, I don't know, impress them maybe. Make them laugh. It was stupid and cruel and I regret it. I've regretted it every second since it happened." "Had you ever seen Malcolm Delaney before that night?" "No, never." "Do you know anyone who might know him? Anyone connected to intelligence work, government security, military special operations?" "No, I work in advertising. My friends are in marketing, finance, tech startups. Nobody in my life has anything to do with that world." "Have you ever traveled outside the United States?" "Canada twice, Mexico once for a vacation, that's it." "Do you have any contact with foreign nationals, friends, colleagues, business associates?" "Just normal work stuff. We have international clients sometimes, but nothing like what you're implying." Sarah made more notes, her expression neutral. Jared couldn't tell if he was doing well or digging himself deeper. Finally, she looked up again. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Hollis. When you grabbed Malcolm Delaney's cane, you triggered security protocols designed to protect retired intelligence officers from hostile contact. Your fingerprints were scanned and uploaded to our databases. When they didn't match any known threats, we initiated a background investigation to determine if you represented a danger to Mr. Delaney or to national security more broadly." "And?" Jared asked, his throat tight. "And we've found nothing concerning. Your background is clean. Your behavior over the past several days is consistent with someone who realized they were under surveillance and reacted with understandable fear and confusion. Your meeting with Mr. Delaney last night appeared to be exactly what it was, a scared person looking for answers." Jared felt a surge of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. "So, this is over? The surveillance stops?" Sarah hesitated, and in that hesitation Jared felt his hope begin to crack. "Not quite yet. I need to understand why you returned to Murphy's Tavern last night. What were you hoping to accomplish?" Jared spread his hands helplessly. "I told you. I was scared. I knew something was wrong, that I was being watched, and I remembered what Mr. Delaney said Friday night about people taking an interest in me. I thought if I could talk to him, he might be able to explain what was happening. I just wanted to understand. How did you know you were under surveillance?" This felt like a trap, but Jared answered honestly. "I felt it. Someone following me on the train, cars parked outside my building, my phone and computer acting strange. Maybe I was paranoid, but I was right, wasn't I?" "You were right," Sarah confirmed. "Which brings me to my real question. How did you know? Most people don't detect professional surveillance, even when they're directly targeted. You noticed within 48 hours. That's unusual. It suggests either exceptional situational awareness or prior training in counter-surveillance." Jared almost laughed at the absurdity. "I noticed because I was already paranoid from what Mr. Delaney said. I was looking for it, and once you start looking, it's not that hard to see. People who follow you, cars that appear multiple times, electronics acting weird. I don't have training. I just have Google and a guilty conscience that made me hypervigilant." Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Jared had the uncomfortable feeling of being dissected by her gaze, every facial expression and body language cue analyzed for deception. Finally, she closed her portfolio. "I believe you, Mr. Hollis. More importantly, my assessment concludes that you represent no threat to Mr. Delaney or to national security. You made a drunken mistake with unfortunate consequences, but you're not a foreign intelligence operative. You're not connected to any hostile organizations, and you're not hiding any dark secrets. You're just an ordinary person who had the bad luck to grab the wrong cane in the wrong bar." The relief was overwhelming. Jared felt tears prickling his eyes and blinked them back. "So it's over? Really over?" "The active surveillance will end today," Sarah said. "Your phone and computer will be restored to normal function. The teams watching your apartment and workplace will withdraw. The investigation will be closed and filed. For all practical purposes, yes, it's over." For all practical purposes? Jared caught the qualification. Sarah's expression became more serious. The file doesn't disappear, Mr. Hollis. It remains in our classified databases. If you ever do become a person of interest in the future, if you're arrested, if you apply for a security clearance, if you come into contact with other protected persons or sensitive operations, this incident will appear in your record, not as a mark against you, but as context. That's just how our system works. Jared nodded, accepting this. It seemed a small price to pay for his freedom. I can live with that. Sarah stood, preparing to leave. At the door, she turned back. A word of advice, Mr. Hollis. This world you glimpsed over the past few days, the surveillance, the investigations, the hidden machinery that protects our country, it's always there, always operating. Most people go their entire lives without bumping into it. You were unlucky, or perhaps careless. But now that you know it exists, be more careful. Be more respectful. Understand that some people carry burdens you can't see, and some things that look ordinary are anything but. I understand, Jared said quietly. And Ms. Winters, thank you for believing me, for making this stop. Sarah smiled slightly. Thank you for being exactly who you appeared to be. That made my job much easier. Take care, Mr. Hollis. She left, and Jared closed the door behind her, leaning against it as the reality of what had just happened washed over him. It was over. The nightmare was ending. He could go back to his normal life, could stop looking over his shoulder, could sleep without fear. He called in sick to work. He needed a day to process everything, to decompress, to start recovering from the stress of the past several days. He spent the afternoon cleaning his apartment, a mundane task that felt wonderfully normal. He called Madison and apologized for being distant, made plans to see her that weekend. He ordered takeout and watched television without analyzing every sound in the hallway. That evening his phone rang. Malcolm Delaney's name appeared on the caller ID, though Jared had never gotten his number, which meant Malcolm must have called him. Another reminder that privacy was complicated. Hello? Jared answered. It's Malcolm. I heard they closed the investigation. I wanted to check if you're okay. I'm okay, Jared said, and meant it. Or I will be. Ms. Winters came by this morning. She said I'm clear, that it's over. Good, Malcolm said, genuine warmth in his voice. I'm glad. You didn't deserve what happened to you, Jared. It was a harsh lesson about a world you never asked to see. Will I see you around? Jared asked, surprising himself with the question. Malcolm chuckled softly. Maybe. I still go to Murphy's most Friday nights. If you ever want to buy me a drink to make up for the one you interrupted, I'll be there. I might take you up on that, Jared said. And Mr. Delaney, thank you. For talking to me, for helping me understand. Call me Malcolm and you're welcome. Take care of yourself, Jared. The call ended. Jared set his phone down and walked to his window, looking out at Chicago's evening lights. The city looked the same as it always had, millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the hidden systems and secret watchers that operated in the spaces between normal existence. He was one of those people again, ordinary, unremarkable, free to live without surveillance or investigation. But he would never forget, would never lose the awareness that had been burned into him over the past week. The world had revealed itself to him in ways most people never experienced, and that knowledge couldn't be unlearned. 3 months later, on a Friday evening in January, Jared pushed through the door of Murphy's Tavern. The bar was warm against the winter cold, crowded with the usual mix of neighborhood regulars and young professionals. He ordered a Guinness from the bar, then carried it to the corner booth where Malcolm Delaney sat nursing his usual whiskey, cane resting against the table. Mind if I join you? Jared asked. Malcolm smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'd be offended if you didn't. Sit down. They talked for an hour, about nothing and everything. Jared's work, Malcolm's retirement, Chicago sports, the brutal winter weather. They didn't discuss the CIA or surveillance, or the week when Jared's life had turned into a nightmare. That was in the past, filed away in classified databases and personal memories, but the cane remained between them, a reminder of the hidden world that existed alongside ordinary life. A world of watchers and the watched, of secrets, and the systems built to protect them, of ordinary-looking people with extraordinary pasts. Jared had learned his lesson. Respect everyone you meet, because you never know what they've lived through or what they're carrying, and some things that look like simple walking sticks are actually weapons designed to protect warriors who never truly leave the battlefield. When Jared left Murphy's Tavern that night, walking out into the January cold, he felt at peace in a way he hadn't since before that October night 3 months ago. He'd made a terrible mistake, paid a steep price in fear and stress, but he'd survived, he'd learned, he'd grown. And Malcolm Delaney, retired CIA operative, sat in his corner booth and watched Jared disappear into the Chicago night, satisfied that the young man who'd grabbed his cane in a moment of drunken stupidity had become someone wiser, more careful, more aware of the hidden complexities of the world. The machinery of intelligence work continued its invisible operation, protecting and watching and evaluating. But for Jared Hollis, that machinery had moved on to other threats, other investigations, other files in other databases. He was free, or as free as anyone could be in a world where privacy was an illusion and watchers operated in the shadows. But he was alive, unharmed, and infinitely more careful about whose belongings he grabbed in bars. So there you have it, the incredible story of how one moment of thoughtless mockery led to a week-long nightmare of surveillance and investigation, and how an ordinary advertising executive learned that the world contains invisible layers of security and secrets that most people never see. Jared Hollis grabbed what he thought was an old man's useless cane and instead triggered a weapon designed for America's most dangerous intelligence operatives. The price of that mistake was high, but the lessons learned were invaluable. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Was the CIA's response justified, or did it go too far? Have you ever encountered someone who turned out to be much more than they appeared? Could you handle being under surveillance for days without panicking? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us your name, city, and state so we can see where our amazing audience is watching from around the country. If you enjoyed this incredible journey into the hidden world of retired spies and the surveillance systems that protect them, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another fascinating story. Give us a thumbs up if this video kept you on the edge of your seat, and don't forget to share it with friends who love real-life spy stories. And right now there's another amazing video appearing on your screen that we think you'll love. Click it and continue exploring the extraordinary stories of ordinary-looking people with extraordinary pasts. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, treat everyone with respect because you never know what secrets they're carrying. We'll see you in the next story.